knows?
All right, we're in business. What's up, Will? How
Literally.
you doing? Yeah,
Yeah,
not
pretty
quite.
good. Business of architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. That Popper's absolutely throwing it down
Oh
in
yeah.
London now. Yeah,
Okay.
we're just walking around, but
Same here in New York,
don't
actually.
miss that.
It's
Oh, really?
it's a bit wet today.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. That's the one thing you probably wouldn't miss from London. Is just the weather is so bad.
Yeah. What's up, Julia?
All good, all good. How are you guys?
Very good.
You're great. Hi,
Cool.
Julia.
Hey,
Nice
Julia.
to meet you. Nice to meet
Nice to
you,
meet you
Will.
too.
Awesome. All right, guys. So I'll let a few more people pile in, but yeah, I'm excited for this one. This is kind of a part two, isn't it, Julia? From the talk we had a few weeks ago, we kind of held ourselves back, and because we were gonna like touch on this subject, and it's
Exactly.
probably been another like hour or two.
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation that we need to have, and yeah, indeed, like it was gonna lead to another hour of
Yeah,
discussion. So.
yeah, yeah. So we've saved ourselves, and now we are recording. So this will not just be lost in the hemisphere. We now have it on record that we can post up, so other people can listen in. So yeah, welcome everybody who's in the crowd to our 21st talk. That's crazy how quickly this has flown by. Rethinking the business model of architecture, and today we've got Will Campion and Giulia De Mauro. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but yeah, I thought you two would be a really good mix to kind of talk on the subject of rethinking the business model. To maybe give you guys a little bit of an introduction for those of you who are not familiar with them, Giulia, who I think needs no introduction, she's a Clubhouse veteran. Giulia De Mauro, she's a founder of the IBD Hub. You are on Clubhouse, YouTube, LinkedIn, talking about creating some really amazing content around the topic of architecture and business. As I said before, you trained as an architect, and then you kind of started to venture over to the business side. You've worked for companies like MDRDV as a biz dev, and you're also teaching on a number of online platforms around this topic. So thank you so much for joining us today. And then we got Will, who is a fellow Bigster you're now in the London office. He's the founder of Campion Design, the co-founder of the property and development company Off Grid Works. And you've also been teaching online a bit around. You're a course leader at the Business of Architects program in Dubai, which is pretty cool. And you've also just done an MBA, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I did my part one, part two, part three in the UK, and yeah, just finished my MBA as well, just to kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you want to mention now.
Yeah, I don't know if Julia or Will, if you want to add anything to that, but go ahead. I hope I didn't miss anything.
No, you did quite well, Ollie. Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it.
Awesome, yeah. And then, of course, as usual, we got Guillaume and Faisal. As usual, Guillaume is tuning in from Arizona, Faisal from Dubai. So we're spreading our wings as usual through various time zones. So thanks, everyone. So yeah, I think this is a kind of a topic we should actually be discussing a little bit more. Like I said, this came from Julia's last appearance on Clubhouse here, where we were talking more about the digital marketing as architects, and we kind of started to flirt with rethinking the business model of architecture. And it's kind of the current way we work as architects is this typical service-based model, right? Where we search for clients that pay us to complete a project, and we essentially get paid for our time. And at the same time, as architects, we've kind of relinquished a lot of responsibilities that we used to do, back in the day when we used to be master builders, to essentially just focus on design. And at the same time, you're seeing a lot of kind of, everyone is slightly frustrated at being overworked and underpaid. It doesn't really matter what practice you work for, what country you're in. It just seems to be a kind of global norm of being an architect. In the UK, I see a lot of the RIBA is kind of getting. There's like a young group of architects really pushing the RIBA to rebel against overtime and being paid overtime and all that kind of stuff, which I think is great. But I think the real issue is I don't think these businesses are like, uh, not wanting to pay or the employees overtime. I don't think the business model could actually support it. And then, at the same time, we're getting young people kind of being put off the profession. We're losing some really great people to other professions now, especially like the big tech industry coming into the architecture space. So I felt like, and at the same time, we also are kind of in this era where we actually really need a lot of architects to be working on sustainable solutions to how we build. Like, we're going to need to build faster, more sustainable, and right now I think we're kind of losing a lot of people to other professions, or they're being put off joining as architects. So that's the kind of setup for the talk, and I thought we could discuss some kind of potential alternatives to this situation. So I think maybe it would be good to get your guys' opinion on what you think the current business model of architecture is, and like why right now do you think it's not quite working for us as architects? Like, if there's anything you want to add to that kind of initial introduction, maybe Julia, we'll start with you if that works.
Sure. I just wanted to give a little bit of background as to why we have this issue,
Mm,
if that's okay with you.
absolutely.
Right. So from my professional experience and my opinion, what I see is that we are the product of an institution, right? So from the education until we start practicing, we are part of institutions such as RIBA and RIBA and BNA and whichever country you are from. And this institution is very good at not teaching financial wealth and business and marketing notions. And the reason why that is that, of course, if architects had the tools to be financially stable, the tools to have businesses that are actually gaining money that they are worth. Of course, the whole real estate market, like the prices would be blowing up to incredible proportions. So somehow throughout the years, we have not been given this chance to learn finance, business, and marketing. Um, and I think that that's where the intention was initially, and we kind of continued this way. And I think that now, especially since COVID, a lot of people are waking up because there's a lot of talents in the architecture field that want to innovate and that know that a better world is necessary to build. But they are still not sure on how to put together a business that is sustainable and that um, is paid correctly within the field. So this is just what I wanted to add to the introduction side of things. This is Julia, and I'm done.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? We're just not taught any of this. I mean, Will, we were chatting
Yeah.
before about this. Actually, we're just not
Yeah.
taught anything. Like, I mean, a lot of what we talk about is the technology side of architecture, and there's a gap on that side as well. But it's nowhere near as bad as actually the business side. Like, you're very rarely taught anything about business until you get. I mean, in the UK, until you get to like maybe your part three, or there's some kind of in practice modules that flirt with, business stuff, but it's very broad and like very simple. Like, this is an LLC versus a partnership and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting for all degrees and all subjects, even since, you know, primary school or high school, we're all taught, 9 to 5 and, well, not even 9 to 5, and then abiding by the rules and doing the different, responding to a bell. And it's been the same kind of educational system since the Industrial Revolution, and you kind of have to go and be employees. That's the thing, which generally works okay in most fields, to go and be an employee. But I think our issue is that architecture is kind of a combination of engineering and creativity. So we partially enjoy doing it, which means some people find additional value other than just monetary things from working, which means it kind of, some people enjoy doing architecture, which means we don't actually get
The passion
totally
problem.
paid because, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which means that we do accept lower pay in some better companies because we feel like, oh, we're going to do cooler projects. Or sometimes, I mean, I had an offer from like Atelier Bow Wow in Japan, but then didn't go because, they don't pay anything. But there's plenty of people who were still taking those jobs and not getting paid, but they enjoyed it at the time. And it's kind of a balance between us and being able to monetize our creativity, because like we have all these great ideas, but like you said, we don't actually have the business schools kind of background to know how to monetize these things, because we're actually taught, like most people, just to be employees. So to kind of go that next stage was the reason why I kind of did an MBA. And the people who I met on the MBA, they had great kind of backgrounds coming from Apple or Tesla or something, and were pretty well remunerated anyway, but they didn't actually have the ideas to run their own companies, but they had all of the degrees necessary. Whereas we kind of actually have a lot of ideas, and we're taught to just constantly solve problems creatively, like a funnel where we just absorb the zeitgeist and all this information and try and create an architectural solution to these usually abstract political and socioeconomic problems, when actually we could, with just a little bit of help, where people telling you how to properly finance and properly market things, you could actually get a lot of startups out of the architecture industry. And then it would stop people becoming enfranchised, thinking they're completely stuck in a profession where they're not going to earn enough to even pay off their student loans, or to even ever start their own company if they don't have huge family fortunes to rely on. And so it's a little bit of a balance between the passion project side of it, and then also having the necessary tools to actually monetize our creativity. And it's also kind of compounded by the fact that we're not our own clients, and we're having to fight for competitions, and we're doing a lot of free work trying to get competitions, which is the kind of the iconic egotistical projects that we really want to do, and the cool projects, and we end up doing a lot of work for free. So yeah, it's an interesting, there's a bit of an issue with the profession, but I think it's becoming a case where the most responsible thing for us to do as architects going forward is to try and find sustainable, scalable business models that we can do, which helps society, and then that will help basically finance the way to do sort of competitions and more kind of riskier projects, because it's tough. I mean, Big does a really good job, but there could be a few bad competitions away from not having enough cash flow to cover projects. I know Foster's went through those issues. Chipperfield goes through issues like that. Zaha, all these companies, where if you have a really really few bad years, it can be not win any competitions for no fault of your own.
Yeah.
It can be really tricky. So I feel like it's good that we can we have the ability to do it, but just with a little bit of a push in the right direction, I think we can actually do something, help the world, and also get properly remunerated for it.
Make the world a better place, but also get rich. I
think. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why Elon Musk is like the best architect in some ways.
Yeah. That's an interesting quote. And I think when you compare like Elon Musk, for example, compared to Bezos, they're two very different billionaires, and how they've gone to that is like two very different routes, which I think not everyone kind of appreciates sometimes when you talk about these kind of famous billionaires. But I think you make some really good points in a couple of, as you were talking. I mean, going back to education, it seems like everything actually kind of stems from rethinking architecture education, which, I mean, that's a whole other talk in itself. But, especially when we're talking about, a number of issues are kind of coming from university that just needs to be rehauled and rethought about adding some new skill sets to young students coming out of it. But I do kind of agree that whilst I understand it, architecture is a difficult profession to like come out of university and start your own practice, because it is a profession that requires a fair bit of experience. Hence why, like, most well-known architects are not, they're not like what we call super young. They're like well into their 40s or something. The typical architect is like what?
Bjarke is a child
Yeah,
in
yeah,
comparison.
exactly.
It
Yeah,
seems like
Bjarke was like one of the only to, and he started to emerge in his 30s, and so it's not like you've got some 21-year-old kid coming out of school and creating the next best thing. And I get it. It's a little bit difficult to do that in the world of construction, where it's high risk stuff. But I do agree that, like, and I've never kind of, the idea that you're just constantly fishing. I wouldn't say begging, but you're kind of like constantly convincing these developers, clients, and companies, or whoever they are, to like give you a project so you can work on this amazing project that you really want to work on. It never seemed like, I felt like there's got to be a better way to do this. And I think your point on the startup thing is great. I think what we do as architects is actually it's that idea, it's the big vision, it's that big concept. So when you think about spending, like, we basically do create these little startup packages, but unfortunately it's just missing a chunk of pages on the back that's the business plan. But we create the bit that people get really excited about, especially like with a lot of the things we actually visualize the idea or whatever it is. So I do really think that the future could be like, maybe you could come out of university and, yeah, you're not starting a full-blown architecture practice or a construction company, but you are creating some kind of archi-based startup that could grow into something. But yeah, we're just architecture school is very much about get an awesome portfolio, maybe get shortlisted for some award or something, so you could get a awesome job at like a well-known firm. That's pretty much like, that's the dream at university, isn't it? Just to get hired by someone. There's very few people that I could remember were even thinking about starting a business out of university, or like a few years out of university.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I just hear a lot of, no disrespect, but I hear a lot of excuses.
Yeah.
So I hear, like, because it's what everyone says, right? Like, oh, you cannot start your own company as soon as you finish uni, and we love our jobs, so a lot of people take advantage. But if you think about all other fields, other people like their job too, and yet they don't get advantage from by companies. So we need to stop with excuses in order to move on, because that is part of the problem, right? We are programmed not to know our value through university and through these huge companies that just don't want you to tell you that you're a good designer, or they don't want to tell you that the job that you did is good enough. So I feel like the first step to rethink the business model and empower each other is going to be to first stop with excuses. Because if you really want to create your own company, or if you really want to be paid in the right way when you go in a company, you can, right? And it's the same when you say, oh, we have to convince developers. No, you don't have to convince anybody. If you know your value and you're really good at communicating it through your brand, people will queue at your door to work with you. So I feel like very often we put that as a an excuse, and we don't move forward. So that is, for me, part of the problem. The second problem is also the fact that most university, they don't want to change, right? So I have had many conversations across many countries to try to install a business development and marketing course, for instance. And out of all these universities, there is only one that has allowed to do a master of business of architecture. Only one in the whole world, guys. So we need to then solve the problem in the professional ground, because the education field is too old-fashioned to get things moving on, and is not in their advantage as well. So that's the only thing I wanted to point out.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I started my company at 21 while at uni, like architecture company, because I mean, for starters, I was the first year in the UK to pay triple fees. So it was like a necessity where I felt I kind of needed to pay for the student loan. So and I had the opportunity to come to me, and I never thought that I knew it'd be difficult, but it was an immense opportunity. So I took it at 21 and then built the house, and then that's free advertisement. And then, like you said, if you can actually do that, and I'd never heard of anybody who had done it, it kind of compounds. And then when I got my offer from MIT, they had never heard of anybody ever building a house sort of that young, and then having multiple clients going forwards at 21, 22. And then it was only from working in New York, and then realizing that to go beyond, you can do it initial houses for people, and actually I was earning way more money doing that than in practice. It was then to go to the next level of, I had, Instagram is now an amazing tool, which didn't exist even really 5 years ago. So it was getting most clients even through that, and it was super cheap, and advertisement was easy, and that was more sustainable. It was just getting to the next level beyond just a sole proprietor. That's when I decided to do the MBA, and then also realizing that we're kind of in a cyclical industry, and to try and insulate myself, that's when I realized that we could actually have the ability to vertically integrate, and I could actually just buy land myself and then just develop that instead. And then through doing that, also investigate new construction techniques and try and build houses faster, and try and alleviate housing crisis here. So yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it is, it is, there are a lot of excuses where you can say, oh, no one's ever told me that I could do this. But yeah, sometimes you just gotta go for it. And it is possible. And actually, with what I teach on my course, is when there's so many students who come out with amazing ideas from university, and then I help them write their business plan, and then they can start kind of putting it into practice, and then they realize, oh, actually, it's not a completely abstract thing. It is actually possible for me to do it, because there's plenty of people who have launched tech companies with absolutely no sort of expertise. And I think we do have the ability to do it, and definitely like going through crits and reviews and having to actually really fight your corner all the time for university really prepares you for sort of showing off your own skills and your own business ideas. I think it's just a case of trying to inspire people. I think that was the thing that most people take away from my course, was them being inspired that they could actually do it. And I think a lot of the time we're taught, oh, we have to go through part 1, part 2, part 3, work in practice, hopefully earn a bit of money, then try and start a thing. But I think now it's great to really use Instagram as an amazing tool for sharing off, and getting a bit of a base, and then trying to build anything that we can if options come, and then off the back of that try to eventually help the world instead. I think previously people would have to just take time off work, try and do competitions, try and networking. But I think now with social media, you can network so much quicker and faster and broader than ever before. So yeah, I think now will be like a golden age for architects. I think if we hang around a little bit too much, there's going to be this redundant class of architects where BIM completely like reduces the amount of architects we'll ever need, or computational design. So I think the more that we can start to innovate now and analyze the different issues in society and work on solutions, and then actually formulate that into a business plan and sit down and think, what would my mission statement be or positioning statement be for a company? And actually, you could actually be your own client as an architect rather than just waiting for somebody to give you permission to do something, actually just doing it yourself. So I think that's one thing. As an architect, we're always waiting. We have to wait for so many permissions for somebody to tell us I'll design this cool thing or this cool statement that you're going to do. When actually, I think now there are the tools out there to almost be our own clients.
And you bring very good example. Like you said that you like build a house yourself, and then that you're planning on buying land, and that's the thing that fascinates to me in architecture is that most of the money in the architectural world is in the construction act and in the real estate, and like the architect is trying to get a piece of it in some way, or try to convince people that designing something just to make it better, obviously, and there is value there, but the actual money is mostly in construction and real estate, and we have very little understanding on kind of the finance behind these things. You work on big project, and obviously people have to price it, or you're given kind of the general guideline of what the developer wants, and you, as you say, you kind of like follow the rules. But I think there are architects that start to develop. I mean, I just switched to a design build office, so I'm kind of that was out of the curiosity I have. Is like, can you start to understand what it means to build and the finance behind that, and then offer solutions where you fully understand all these constraints and you can play with them. There is a lot of time on project where obviously design something obviously is way too expensive, and it's someone who tells you it's too expensive, but you have very little understanding of where this money is spent, and how to leverage. And if you have a good contractor, he would probably give you a little bit of insight, but in general it's like really difficult to they control the numbers, and they don't really want you to get into them. So I think if you
Yeah.
have control over that, and you're able to understand it and create architecture, that's great, but also understanding the kind of financial impacts of what you're doing is a kind of like next level to me. And it seems like you're kind of on this path, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be, yeah, because I started looking at it, and I had friends who were in like running hedge funds, and that's kind of where a lot of the money comes from big for the big projects that we do, where it's like a big investment company, and they promise certain returns to their investors, and they're basically pooling all these billions together because it's not, and then that goes to a property developer who then hires the architect, etc. But then you can almost kind of cut out the middleman if you are the one who's really selling the stuff, and you have a lot of the vision. And I mean, in the UK, it's kind of a unique issue, but there's a lot of planning regulations here. It's very difficult to build. But I found that through my expertise, I had very good insight into what like land could be built on, and it's massively undervalued. And I think most of the architects actually do have that knowledge, because that's our job, is to find out what building sites could be planned on and built on. And then I found this land that was actually just dirt cheap because nobody thought that they could build on it. But I thought that I could. You just had to design something appropriate. So I got it super cheap, and then just fought for a whole year, and literally have only just got planning on it now. And most of that is because there's regulations which are in favor of sustainable, innovative buildings. So if you just have to design an exceptional, an innovative building, and they'll give you planning. And that's really only the job of an architect. It's difficult for a property developer to analyze that and say, oh yeah, I can buy this land because I'm pretty sure I can get this ephemeral thing, which is like an innovative, sustainable building. But an architect does know that. So it's just kind of weird that we spend so much time invested in sort of things that are very, very high risk, like a competition where we do so much work for free, where we could have actually invested a very small amount of this, because the land is like only a few £1,000s, not talking hundreds of thousands, to actually buy parcels of land ourselves. And that creates actually a sustainable workflow, because you're just buying pieces of land and developing it, and you're developing much more beautiful, better buildings for people, because you're not constrained by investors who want specific returns. And you actually have more control over the end product, rather than a client who's fundamentally paying you by the hour. So actually that kind of vertical integration is quite easy for us, but you just have to kind of get an understanding of what the finance modeling is. And that's where the kind of business plan is, because even if you said, oh, I found this really cool piece of land, but I can't afford it, but I'm pretty definite I can get planning on it, you could still go to a bank and get a loan from it and build the land. Or you could even go to an investor. There's what we don't realize, in the capital markets, just so much money flowing around. I mean, that's the whole point of billionaires, is that they're then putting more money into these industries, and they want to invest in these kind of projects. If you said, oh yeah, I can guarantee 20% returns, because actually property development is super lucrative, especially in the UK. We could actually kind of start being our own developers a little bit more, and we'd get better quality buildings and the results. So that's kind of what I started to realize when people would hire me to get planning on a super difficult site, and I was putting in so much effort, so much work, and whereas they were standing to earn hundreds of thousands of pounds by just sitting there and letting me do the work, and I was, you're getting paid by the hour. And I thought, well, the land was cost them next to nothing. I could have actually just put the fees that I made, bought the piece of land, and then put my effort in, and then you're also way more incentivized to do the work. And yeah, so definitely the first thing they should start with is trying to build your own house as well. And my plan going forward will be to then, once you've got your own house, you can finance against that, and you can build more houses. And that's actually this secret that we have as architects, is we're masters of construction, and construction has consistently been one of the most profitable industries across the world, especially real estate.
Yeah,
and we can kind of get more slice of the pie.
That's a great point, and that seems to be like the low hanging fruit of like how to kind of rethink the business model is we take back some of the things we used to do and become architect developers. Actually, a really great book on this is literally called ARCHI-TECH Developer. It's an AIA book. It's really good. I think you can find it on Amazon. The cover is like just all black, but a classic architecture book. But that touches on some of this, is really interesting. And I always thought the same thing. Well, actually, I was like, I've been abroad from the UK for a while now, but like, when I was hearing, I'd catch up with friends back home, when you get to that age where everyone's like starting to buy apartments in London, or they're all going outside of London because they can't afford it. And I was like, oh, cool, you should build somewhere. And they're like, what? Do you think I'm a millionaire? Like, how am I going to build something? I can't even afford to buy it. And I was like, well, that's the one time as architects we actually have an opportunity to put in that sweat equity and make a bit of money on our project. And you have that, exactly what you're saying, that skills and expertise. But even my friends as architects, no one even considered that. They thought like, oh, that's not possible till you're like, you've had a couple of houses, you sell them and paid off your mortgage and that kind of thing.
That's true, because I wasn't even fully aware, but there's development finance as well, where banks, they'll loan you money to build the house. If you bought a piece of land that has no planning permission on it, and you get planning on it, it suddenly goes up in the value anyway. You can loan against that as collateral, and then you build the house with development finance from a bank, and then you can then the house then is probably going to be worth twice as much as the actual construction costs, even in remote rural England, which is where I'm looking at. So, and then you've actually got that capital available to do something else. And that, I mean, that's just on a personal level. But as an architecture company, that's also something would be good to expertise to kind of, you're in a cyclical industry, so we're kind of quite exposed to recessions and economic shock because construction is usually something that when there's a bit of more risk, people do slow down annoyingly. But if we started to look at starting to develop a little bit more, I think for starters we'd get better houses, better quality houses, more sustainable, more innovation, and we would actually start to not be lurching around where during the pandemic where there's a slight downturn, we're having to make everybody redundant and then hiring them back when it kind of comes back up again.
I mean, that's when developers make their money, isn't it? They invest into land during a downturn, and it's that classic saying of a great client makes a great project. And if you are your own client, then in theory you should be a pretty good product because you're not having to kind of you're your own boss. But I guess there's a danger you might overbuild or over design things. But
yeah, exactly. I think it is also tricky because I mean I went to Bath Uni and we do a lot of detailed design and structural design. But even all the way through part 3, when we don't learn that much about planning, for instance, and a lot of that was self-taught. But once you kind of get the hang of it, we're supposed to be experts in these fields anyway. So that's kind of that vertically integrated to property developer is the quickest way. And then also the way the contracts are written in the UK, it's also very difficult to find good contractors who will build. So that's why I realized that when we're tendering and we're contract administrators and we're watching what all of the contractors are doing, I realized that actually I used to work on site as well as a laborer as a kid and going forwards, and I thought I could just start my own construction company anyway. So that's my next step, is to completely vertically integrate, and then you've got a completely sustainable, scalable business model where profits, if profits are obviously lower in an architecture company, then you can divert from the construction or from property development, and it's kind of and it's all the same kind of skills, but it just meant that I think when I've spoken to a lot of people, they're kind of scared about raising capital, and because we have it's going to university, I met a lot of anti-capitalists or just people who you want to help the world, and you think we're actually kind of scared of the markets or not entirely sure how they work, but it can actually work in your favor, and banks will lend to people, and there's even investors out there, and there's loads of property developers or investment companies that would easily, if you had a good business model in these sorts of industries, they'll give you money. That's what I only started to realize the past few years. When I started my company, I just lurched into it thinking, oh yeah, this is what we do, we just pay by the hour. And then now when you look at it, you think actually we have really good ideas, we can write good business plans for concepts or ideas that we have, and then we just approach funders. And even I've just been sending off funding applications to the UK government, and they're giving out millions and millions of pounds for anyone who's in the UK or any registered businesses here for smart grants for companies that are trying to do something innovative. And it's just no questions asked, just grant money. So and that's something which never really considered previously, even at Cambridge, that you just have to do your part 1, part 2, part 3 and work, and that's your life. But actually there's another way which could be really exciting.
I think there's that.
Ollie,
go on, Giulia.
Sorry, I was wondering if I can give some practical steps for the ones that are listening, because we're talking very specific. So I think that's one book that is very interesting for people to read. I already give it to a couple of people in the audience actually. It's called Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Oh yeah.
And I think that that's really an eye opener of how to start investing in real estate, and purchasing land, or purchasing a house, and find benefit in it. And it also teaches you how to start with no money at all, by getting in contact with people that would be ready to invest, right? So I know it sounds weird, but if you have a very good opportunity of a good land or a good building that can be refurbished or can be rented for a high price, you can always find people, whether it's within your network or within investment companies, that would be able to uh, basically pay cash for the property or the land, and you would just get a percentage for bringing the deal. And what that does is that the more you accumulate these deals, the more you start having money to then be the investor yourself. So I think it's a great book to read. And Ollie, I wanted to also talk about, because last time we touched on it, was on crowdfunding. So how can you buy a land or an existing building by putting together several people and raise the right money to purchase it, and that's called crowdfunding as well. So, it's important to do the research and think outside of the box. I think as architects, sometimes we stay too much within the architecture field, and that's all. So, it's always interesting to look at what other people are doing in real estate. Another book is Real Estate Titans, which is apparently really great. It was recommended by a property developer in London. I haven't finished it yet, so but there are a lot of resources out there to then understand how people like Will did it. And I think that is key to really bring down the barriers, right? So you cannot rule something out if you don't do the right research. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
No, that's really good. Yeah, Rich Dad Poor Dad. He's this genius book. And then there's also the 4 hour work week, which is kind of also interesting. Tim Ferriss is kind of good. It's slightly different, but it kind of helped me just talking about, like I said, more asset owning and just passive incomes and just different kinds of revenue streams and things like that, which we don't really think about when we're just in a service industry and exchanging time for money, which is we only have so much time,
Yeah.
which is very difficult. So it's good to kind of insulate that. And yeah,
I know we got some few hands that have been raised. We will bring you up on stage in a minute. I just want to kind of keep the conversation going at the moment. But yeah, I think there's a couple really good. There's a lot of threads to follow there. I think Giulia, what you touched on, the crowdfunding is you've got kind of we're kind of talking about a few different solutions. Like there's the flirting and getting into the architect developer world, which I think is a really nice way to start things and get things going and ultimately become your own boss. Then, as Julia mentioned, is the kind of maybe more startup route where you crowdfund an idea or funding or something like that. I think obviously we're talking on a technology channel. I think there's some really interesting technologies that are like converging with this at this time. Of course, you got platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, but there are platforms like that specifically for real estate, for example. One of the other things I've always been interested in, and Judah, we've talked about this a couple times, is the idea of and kind of what we touched on as with the student projects is like you spend all this time doing a competition and this idea you compete against like 100 different architects and hopefully you get this contract to work on this project or whatever it is. But really, if you spent that same time could you come up with like a cool idea for a startup and publish it, put it out there, and after the fact try and bring in a client or an investor and make it into a project yourself, a prospective project kind of approach. And we've seen, like, this is nothing really new, I guess. The architects are doing this. I think Chris Precht is a good example of that, where one of the projects he did recently was the Burt House, or this not Butt House, Burt House, which is like these CLT tubes that like are kind of these getaway spaces in the forest. And he made that project, and it was just like a fun thing that they did. They pumped some time into the idea, made some made some kind of nice visuals and put it out there. And then they kind of went and found, I don't know exactly, but an investor or someone that connected it to a company. And now, if you follow his Instagram, they've just built like the first couple ones. So that same time that theoretically he could have put into a competition, he put into this prospective idea, and now it's their own business, or he's part of a business. Obviously I don't know the exact details of it, but that as well seems like a way more kind of innovative and entrepreneurial approach, and also a more impactful approach. Like the starting a business and creating a startup at the moment in society seems to be the most effective way to make change on society, right? And so I think that's also a really interesting part. And again, it ties into that same thinking of understanding how to crowdfund and creating your own startup and making that business model. So again, it's tying into the same thing, but I think it's just an interesting slightly different avenue that you could add to a typical business model of an architecture practice, right?
I think you're really right, Ollie. And with my clients, we work on a different model. So there are a lot of property developers that think it is risky to pay an architect up front for the work that they do before they actually sell the building or rent the building. So more and more what we find is property developers that are open for architects to have shares of the building that they're developing instead of being paid as much as they would. And I don't know if you realize, but like architects are paid, between 8 and 12% of construction costs. But in this case, you would be paid a percentage on the value of the building once it is finished, right? So a building that cost 9 million to be built is worth much, much more, probably 4 times more when it's finished. So your percentage and your gain in this for taking the risk yourself is much like the benefit is greater. And of course it is a bigger risk, but I think that people that really make good money are the risk takers. So people that are wanting to take the challenge, and it's less risky than doing competitions because you're not faced to anybody else, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
that is a
We
business
were in a
model.
room, weren't we, Julia, where we were talking to some developers, and they put that out there, and nearly every architect was
Yeah,
like, "No way!" And I was like, "Wait, that's a
I know.
that's a great idea." I was like, "I'll do it."
Yeah.
I think
This.
it's a mindset. Again, it's a mindset of the architect, because we have been taught and programmed to do things the
Yeah.
way that we are
There's
doing
also,
things.
I
So
don't know, it's a
Yeah.
bit of a folktale. I think it is true, but I know, I heard that Bjarke, when he did the VM house, they actually took they took that approach, and I think he supposedly he took one of the apartments as the payment or something like that. Like he got one of the apartments or a percentage, so he got a couple of apartments or whatever of the block that they built as their fee. I don't know. I don't have the exact facts. I don't know if Kai is in the audience. He might know, but
That's true. I remember that. I think he mentioned it in the
yeah, and he
podcast.
lived in the project for a few years as well. Which I was like, damn, I would absolutely do
Yeah,
that for a nice little penthouse suite. Like somewhere.
that's it. I mean,
Exactly.
that's what Shop has been doing as well.
Yeah,
That was their
Shop.
business model from the
That's
beginning.
what I was always interested in Shop about
Strange.
this, but and they did do some of that stuff where they started to go architect developer. They also created Shop Construction, which I think they had a
Mm.
few legal issues or something like that. But then what was weird is
Yeah.
that's what always excited me about Shop. But now I look at Shop and they're a very typical architecture firm of, from the outside it just seems like, getting projects and back to competitions and that
Mm.
kind of stuff. So
That's the thing. Like I had have one client like that, and the contract which I wrote, it was just I gave them an option of how much equity in comparison to my fees. So they either pay me more upfront and then more equity later down the road, or it's more upfront now and then less, less partnership down the road. And they were way happier to do that because it's less risk for them upfront, and they were able to decide. And a lot of it was almost just enough to cover your expenses. So even if they go ahead with a property, you're actually going to keep break even, and then there's equity down the road. It's just more of a speculative approach. It's just, I mean, the standard form of agreement by REBA doesn't allow you to
yeah,
do these sorts of things, so you have to
to
go a little bit off
play
road.
to play
But
devil's
they,
advocate, like we've all worked in
yeah,
practice. That like less than 10% of what you work on or whatever actually moves forward. So obviously
yeah,
I guess it would be a kind of venture fund approach where like 10 die and one company lives and becomes the Facebook or whatever, or it would
yeah,
obviously have
exactly.
to be. Would you say? Do you think it would have to be supplementary, or um, that is a sustainable approach?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a
Right.
balance. And like you said, it's more sustainable than competitions where you might win 1 in 10, and then uh, um, yeah, and also it's like also there's also a lot of time wasters who will just want free time of you. So they might say, "Oh yeah, I'll get you equity down the line," but actually you've got to kind of do your research and make sure their funding is solid. How they're actually going to build, and just having a little bit of awareness at the person, because there have been people who say, "Oh yeah, I'll give you, you could give it a portion down the road," but then they're just kind of making it up as they go along to
Yeah.
get free work. But generally, yeah, it's way better and it's more speculative, and it means that you're more incentivized to work because you're more likely, if you said in the UK, oh yeah, it's no win, no fee, so you pay me if you get planning permission and it's a proportion of the value of the land, then you're more incentivized to work. They think you're more incentivized to actually get planning and design something good. Um, yeah, it's definitely more win-win. I think it's definitely becoming more of a thing in the UK, but like you said, we're kind of risk averse. We think, oh, it's architecture's hard enough anyway, but we're kind of not actually making it harder on ourselves than it's supposed to be. Like you said, all other industries
I mean,
go through
also
this.
as a young
So
architect,
it's you got to speculate to
yeah,
accumulate.
as a young architect, just creating your own
Yeah,
practice,
you got to
you
take
have that
risk.
room to take risk, I think, and the payoff could be a lot, quite significant. Whereas, you've spent the
Exactly.
equivalent time of doing a free competition or a couple of free competitions or whatever. So yeah, I think yeah.
That's
Um,
true.
Sorry, Ollie, I did want to ask about sort of the crowdfunding. Is that why we don't see it as much now then? Or are there other sort of challenges that come with that? Because I feel like with social media, it's almost like a cheat code for architects to gain a large platform with large following and then use that to sort of crowdfund their projects. Or even with things like NFTs and cryptocurrency and smart contracts, it gives architects another option, right? So I guess why don't we see that as much with the newer generation? Is there other challenges that come with that, or is it just the sort of inherent fear of risk, I guess, that we have as architects, or maybe we're not educated in that enough? What do you think it is that sort of keeps architects from really exploring that avenue?
Can I answer?
Yes, please.
I think it's partly ego. I think that a lot of architects, they don't want to share their ideas. They don't want to share their startup. They don't want to share their own company. So partly that. And the second part, I think, is the lack of knowledge in terms of how to manage all the stakeholder and really have like a business plan to raise the right money, and the marketing skills to uh, advertise it so that you manage to raise the capital. So at least that's from my perspective.
I think
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, there was one thing I thought about that if it was going to sell houses, it's way better doing it through crypto. If you did have that like a crowdfunding thing where you said there was a crypto specifically for housing, and people who want houses are going to buy it, and then the people who currently own it, it's just going to accumulate in value rather than deflationary fiat currencies. But I think just have it takes a long time to even learn how to build the buildings and do the detailing. So some people are so focused on that we're not really thinking. But I think it's good to have these kind of discussions. And like you mentioned before, the Future Architects Front. I know Charlie from Cambridge, who organised that. They were the ones who pushed for overtime pay in the UK, and they just did it through social media and memes, basically. And eventually, people listened, and then they actually made change that way. But their marketing was incredible. But that was mainly through memes, but that actually created great change in the architecture industry here over the past couple of months. And so I think, before we didn't think it was actually possible, but I think we can kind of see now that actually it is accessible and we can do things. People are proving that you can do these things. You just got to, like you said, do a bit more of a business plan and actually sit down about thinking what our actual aims we want to achieve are, and then work out a strategy to sort of
I think
achieve
it's
that.
also from maybe like a technology standpoint. I think whilst doing crowdfunding for real estate, and because I was looking into this a while back in kind of 2017, 2018, there's like companies like Crowdlord in the UK and a few other of these platforms, which it's not that difficult to set up a platform where you can crowdfund these things, but of course the technology is always ahead of sometimes the law and all these other kind of things, and real estate is a little more complex. So I know in the UK, like there was a bit, and in the US there was like a couple big changes in the law or whatever. I don't know the specifics that kind of made it a little bit more accessible to people. I think our very first talk here on ATN was about blockchain and architecture. Maybe we should have a revival, Faisal, because it keeps kind of coming up. But I think, like cryptocurrencies, I actually did a big school recently in the office on blockchain and architecture. And even in that first talk, I don't know, Guillaume and Faisal, if you remember, we were talking a lot about cryptocurrency for like a cryptocurrency that's backed by real estate that could be used for crowdfunding and stuff. But like people were more interested in NFTs at that time because it was just like everyone was doing NFTs and like, oh man, we could sell images. And but to me, the blockchain is going to be a huge part of I think it's most impactful in the real estate arena. And there are a few companies in the UK. I feel like the UK is pushing and adopting blockchain a little bit more. But yeah,
Can I
yeah,
just add
go.
to that, Ali, when you're done? Yeah, in terms of cryptocurrency, I mean, it's a difficult topic, right? Because I mean, I'm working on a new kind of crypto at the moment, and you have very strict regulations that don't allow you to pay for real estate with crypto, because yeah, you cannot do background check on people. So it makes it difficult. And also the other thing is that creating a coin takes a lot of marketing skills in a way, because you have to create a story that people will support. You have to create a community that believes that crypto is worth something, and then you need to release it in different phases for it to really expand and gain value. Because if there is like only 20 people that have the coin, it's not going to be worth anything at all. So it's a lot of learning curve, and it's a lot of you know it's a lot of effort. It's not something that you can just do for the sake of doing, in a way. So it has
That's the thing,
its
especially in the
proper
real estate world,
challenges
the
as well.
technology is always way further ahead, and then everything has to catch up for it to be implementable at some point. But yeah, that's super exciting. We'll definitely, maybe we should do a revival of another. We'll go full circle and do another blockchain talk. All right, so I see we have a few questions. Sorry for the people that raised their hands. I just wanted to let the conversation go. But yeah, if Julia and Will, you got some time, we can field a few questions from the audience. If you do have a question, put your hand up, and we'll bring you
Yep.
onto stage. Otherwise, T or Hung, do you want to add anything to the conversation, or got a question?
Yeah, thanks. Great conversation, and thanks for having me. I was just curious about the political side of architecture involvement, because a lot of laws and regulations actually hinder architects uh, from having certain like rights or power to the projects. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that were, and how you think we can involve ourselves in politics to help help our profession along. Because in Texas alone, and I'm sure it's different everywhere, um, architects can be bypassed if the building is under 20,000 square feet. So a lot of projects end up not having architecture involvement. And I'm done speaking.
Yeah, obviously, it's a. I mean, so you're saying? Did you say if the product is under that amount, then an architect doesn't have to be involved? But I mean, I know there's this statistic that floats around that like less than not 90 less more than 90% of buildings that are built around the world don't use an architect at all. I think that's specifically residential, but I mean, from what you explained, I guess that doesn't that doesn't stop you from kind of creating your own thing, and as an architect getting into that house building yourself. um, I know there are like some architects that are kind of for example in the UK space, that are kind of in the political world, but I mean, I always think that it's like the government. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, the government moves so slowly. Of course, it is a critical part, so you need advocates in that space, but the government works so slowly that, like I said before, like the best vehicle for making change in the world is a business or like some kind of startup or movement. So I don't know, Will and Julia, if you have a kind of thought on that, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
a little bit different
I
because planning
sorry.
can be very political, right? You kind of like go to your local borough and kind of have a conversation with the planning officer and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, maybe I'll let you guys jump in.
Personally, I have witnessed that if you are within you build relationships with the political people, whether it's municipalities or institutions, and you have a very good relationship with some real estate developers that themselves have a lot of political relationships, it definitely helps, because at the end of the day, the government wants to promote new new buildings, especially mixed-use buildings that will make a turnover, because that's good for the economy. So of course there is ways to go around rules, and a lot of times they close an eye on a lot of regulations in order for the projects to go ahead and actually work out. So of course it depends on which country. I'm talking about more Europe based network here. But yeah, it's definitely possible. And I think that if architects were spending less time networking with architects and more time networking with real estate developers and political side of things, it might be more beneficial.
Yeah, like I agree. I think it is good to kind of definitely expand your network. When I was in New York, actually, I kind of became a bit friendly with AOC, so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in just as she was getting re-elected. I was at her inauguration, and we spoke a lot about like the Green New Deal. And at the time, I was doing research into Amazon's headquarters, HQ2 in New York, and I was hanging around a lot, and we talked a lot about this, the new Amazon headquarters. And at the time, it was a big issue. Ollie, you might remember at the beginning of November, and then it eventually got cancelled and it got moved out. And this was mainly due to the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, who I was kind of researching, and I was members of at the time, and I went to their meetings, and I was really intrigued because like they were having such a profound effect on the urban planning. Because if Amazon's put their new headquarters in Long Island, then it was going to have a crazy effect on that part of New York. And I was talking to AOC about how it was unsustainable, and they weren't totally against Amazon because Amazon already existed in the city, but they thought it should go somewhere else. And that was my project. I was designing a new place for it to go, and I worked with the eco-socialists, they're called, who were basically running parts of Brooklyn. Well, they were elected in parts of Brooklyn, and AOC in the Bronx, and she was a political powerhouse right at the beginning of 2019. And then I was kind of making tracks of like actually getting the new Amazon headquarters built in South Brooklyn instead. But I had to move back to the UK to finish my master's. But that was amazing. That was so accessible. I think the US has a slightly different thing where you have these kind of rock star politicians who do have a bit more of a profile, rather than in the UK. But definitely, like, these people have profound effects on what our cities look like. And that was one of the issues with something like HQ2, is that no one really consulted architects. It was all done by the city's kind of finance minister, and they were just put kind of a proposal of, this is what Amazon's going to be, and it's going to be on this social housing, and we're going to get rid of these hospitals and schools and stuff. And that's kind of where architects we could actually have huge effects. And yeah, you're right. And I just got to know AOC by going to the DSA meetings and then being invited to her inauguration, and just you can talk to them directly and you can have profound effects. And that's in the US, where these people are way more well protected than the UK. But yeah, in the UK, the planners basically have all the power, and then it's down to you building a good reputation with the planners. But a lot of the time, the people just want to do what's best. So as long as you can kind of convince people and you can market yourself and you brand yourself that you're actually going to do good for the world, people can kind of get on board. But yeah, you're right. I think there has to be some conversing with politicians, and I mean, they have most of the effects that we kind of want to happen. And definitely in terms of funding, that's where a lot of money comes from as well.
Yeah.
So,
ARCHI-TECH
yeah, if that helps.
politicians. I don't know if that'd be good or bad. I feel like architects would be good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nothing to do with the stress. It would just be all the hate that you'd get. That's the other thing. At least we can kind of turn away. But yeah, it is an interesting one where the most powerful people in the world are really the richest people. Who would really actually care what Bill Gates said if he wasn't actually the richest person in the world and he was talking about sustainability and things. Whereas, they're actually creating the industries and creating the opportunities, and then they're the ones lobbying the governments. It's we can make huge amounts of change. I think as architects we can definitely have the abilities, and it's also kind of putting yourself out there and meeting these people.
Interesting
That's a big help.
component. Jeff, I've seen you been in the crowd. I don't want to leave you hanging for too long. So if you have a question or something you want to add, jump in.
Thank you, Ali, for calling me up. I actually wanted to weigh in on this conversation. I actually do run a model similar to Will's, well, a little bit of a hybrid model. Our model is more that we do some of our own development, but at the same time, we do a fee-based architecture, even for our own developments to ourselves, because there's always partners involved in other companies. Instead of actually running in a profit sharing at the end, we actually buy our own property as a secondary owner, and then we'll hire our own company to do our own architecture on that component. We ought to hire an architecture company regardless. And one of the things that we found that allowed us to do is that we actually allows us to expand our office drastically, because since the entities are entirely separate and operating independently, then they allow us to expand their own entities independently of each other. Therefore, they're not linked together. So, for instance, our development wing can go borrow money on its own merit through banks, because it's not an architecture company asking for money, which they don't look very kindly on. We found that from banks, they give us a very hard time as we're coming as the architect. But if we come as a developer and showing them that we have a track record, they're very easily to give money that way. That's what we found. I do believe that the biggest issue in our industry and the biggest issue that we're facing is the lack of education within the actual system. They do not teach architects anything about business modeling or anything about operating an actual business. They teach us architecture and they glorify the aspects of the design, and they forget about the fact that we do have to run our companies ultimately. And that, I believe, is the biggest detriment to our industry, and I think that has to be changed on the educational level drastically. Instead of glorifying purely design, but there has to be some education on knowledge of operating a company and finances and other things that go into a typical development, which is not purely design related. I'm Jeff, and I'm speaking.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of underlying theme here now is like, educating architects a lot earlier on some of this stuff. I see you're also based in New York and New Jersey, and I see that there are like an interesting group of architects like yourselves that are doing that architect developer approach. It seems super interesting. I'll definitely check your website as Rise Architecture, right?
Yeah, that is correct. We actually operate now in 8 states. We've expanded our development into 3 states. So we're every single place we do development, we decide to open up a new office there, and the development kind of supports our local office, and then the office could kind of take off on its own merit at that point.
So Jeff, but you are an architect, so tell us, how did you educate yourself if you didn't get it through school?
That's a great question. I grew up in a family that had a financial backing, so a little bit we understood and listened to finances. But we a lot of times, architects sit in meetings and they start talking about the finances and the other aspects that goes into the development deal, and the architect kind of like tunes out. Listen to everything that goes on. You'll be quite surprised how fast you'll learn about the finances. I was sitting in meetings and the clients telling them they're trying to argue with them about who's going to pay for certain parts of the project. I was like, just do yourself a favor and keep quiet. I'll get here in 5 minutes, We forget that we need to know everything that goes into design. Our job as an architect is to hear and see everything across the board, from finances to construction to structural to mechanical, across the board. And a lot of times we forget to listen because we think our job is to design. We have to understand that our job is to understand everything. And the more we listen and the more we pay attention to everything that's going on in the room, we'll learn very quickly what goes on behind the scenes.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Jeff.
Cool. And I see we've got... Oh, Will, do you want to jump in there?
That's good. I was just saying that's awesome. I think, like you said, it's you either get it through osmosis or, but yeah, I think it's good that it kind of scales up, because I guess you weren't doing mega projects initially, and then you start on a small scale and you kind of keep going up. But then, yeah, like you said, the developers are so much easier to get money because it's a pretty straightforward project where you say, oh yeah, I'm going to build this house or this project and you'll get money. Whereas, yeah, you made a good point that as an architect, it's very unreliable, and there's also no exit strategy for an architect. It's very difficult to you can't create a scale like a selling the company. It doesn't, Bjarke, for instance, can't sell Bjarke Ingels Group because it wouldn't really make that much sense if if it wasn't there as much. And so in some ways, most architectural models are self-employed. But then, like you said, by having that paired with a property development company, it's so much easier to find either people to loan to you, if you can kind of guarantee what projects you're doing, or people who are just going to invest anyway, and hope that one day we're going to IPO or sell the company, and that's how most companies work. Yeah, because that's the difference between most startups. Most startups, they're not looking to be the next Amazon. They just want to get bought by Amazon, or they want to get bought by Apple, which is slightly different for us because we can't start an architecture company and then our exit strategy isn't to IPO. There's no companies on the stock exchange really.
Katera.
Only there's a couple
before they go bust. That's when it's getting.
Yeah, exactly, those ones. So yeah, exactly. So that's what we said before. Like Plant Prefab, like this architecture company in California, Plant. They had a prefabrication company that got bought by Amazon. I think it's also Sidework Labs as well.
It feels a bit hollow to start something to
and,
I get it, but to just get bought by one of these giants, but it's an avenue.
I know. I think that's you probably wouldn't go down there, but definitely if for fundraising, when you have a sort of exit strategy possible, where you say potentially a company might get bought eventually if the shareholders decided that they wanted to sell. I mean, that just get a little bit more complicated, but it means that it's easier to find funding for companies that have these kind of business plans, like you said, and a scalable business plan, like you said, going into different states quite quickly.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I know we'll do one more question. If anyone's got a question, raise your hand. But Nignaz, I see you are in. Raise your hand. Would you like to? Yo.
Hi, Ali. How are you? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the room. Thanks so much. I just wanted to, along the same long line, I wanted to add a point and my own experience. So I've talked to some of you about my own startup, AC Plastic. It's been a couple of months I've started it, but I just learned, one of my learnings is that it takes a lot for a startup to get to a point to either get acquired by another company or monetize and make good money. It just takes a lot of time, and a lot of energy, of course, and sometimes a really long time. It could be a couple of years, and it should be something that if anyone wants to do it, it should be something that you're super duper passionate about. I mean, no way to give up. You just keep going, and at some point you will either get acquired or make money. But another relatively quick way to make money for some of us is, so the same time that I started working on my idea, two of my friends got this fixer-upper property in LA and remodeled it. They are both architects, and at the time they were working for an architecture firm. So they bought the place, and it was like not a like good looking place at all. They worked on it. Now it's like gorgeous, and they put it on Airbnb. And now they are and gradually they expanded. So they were making really good money. It's in a good part of a very popular part of LA. So they were making good money. They bought another place. They expanded. So they got it, and the way it works is that you apparently, I'm like learning these things from them, that you can register an LLC, and then the LLC does that for you. So if, like, worst case scenario, something happens, you can quickly cancel the LLC. So anyways, now they are making anywhere from like 10K to 20K per month, and they both like quit their architecture jobs in the architecture firms, and now they are doing that full time. And they just bought 2 pieces of land in another part of LA which is not expanded yet, and they are designing these like gorgeous houses, and they want to continue. I mean, as architects, we always want to design and build things from scratch. Not all of us are necessarily interested in the fixer upper business. But I just wanted to add that could potentially be something that is pretty lucrative and profitable, and some of us can work on it. So just wanted to add that.
Agree. This is great. Thank you so much for mentioning that, because
Sure.
I think that not many people think about it because it feels like unachievable, but it's a very smart way to do it. And thank you for the example, because I think it will open some eyes to a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Actually, I was at another friend's place yesterday, and she's from Germany, and she has bought this place in in the Bay Area. Building ADUs are becoming very popular. So she bought this beautiful place in. I mean, it was not beautiful, but she bought it in Oakland, in Bay Area, and then now she designed herself, and she was telling me how she thinks like Americans don't have good taste in design, and as someone from Germany, she could see this beautiful house. And she was not even an architect. She saw this beautiful house immediately. So she bought a place, and now she has her own place, and she built one ADU, and another she built another part of the house as a separate unit. So she has two Airbnb now in her place and her own place, and she's making, and she it's like it's even a side job for her, but she's making really good money.
That's really good. That's good to hear. I think as well, like you said, it's just finding the right places, because I think as architects we kind of forget that we have this vision that we kind of take for granted if we're kind of always surrounded by architects, that we can actually see like model in 3D in our heads, or see like the potential in a lot of things that a lot of, I don't know, less creative people might not see. So yeah, like you said, definitely for fixer and upping, some people might look at it and think, oh, this looks like a nightmare, or they can't see that what we can see. And then yeah, like you said, there's a bit less risk about the permitting or the actual construction side of it. And also, when I worked on site, you get, just by being in the building, even if you did some of the work yourself, just for fun, you can learn so much more about detailed design, and the how plaster actually feels, and have the paint work, and your actual design ability improves immensely when you're really handling these materials and on site much more in depthly, rather than in practice where you may only go on site a couple of weeks. So
yeah, I went through the exact
win-win.
same thing. I was a laborer, like as a teenager, and in university as well. It was like the perfect job in between school and university. You get basically you get paid to work out all day,
That's
and you
it.
get paid quite well for like the age you're at. And as an architect, you get to learn like all these, how stuff is actually built. I mean, I was doing more like barn conversions down in Devon and Cornwall, but yeah, you do learn a lot by doing those kind of jobs.
So, and yeah, for anyone in the UK, you can also register it as your PEDR, so your professional educational development record. So it goes towards your actual,
I think I did
registration
sneak
as
some
an
in there.
architect.
I can't remember actually. That's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. And you're getting paid better than you would do in practice, and it's just
and you're getting in shape
8 hours
for free
rather than overtime. So yeah, exactly. Be outside. It's definitely that helps a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it was your own house, it's even better, because then you'd get paid by the end.
Awesome. Yeah,
outcome.
I think we've covered a lot of really interesting points. I don't want to keep you guys for too much longer, but yeah, I think we've covered a lot of different kind of potential avenues. I really see the future of practice being like a mix of all these things. Hopefully we'll start to see a lot more kind of Archi-based startups. I know that's a huge thing in the VC world right now. Is kind of build tech, or I forget what the word is now. Yeah, build tech or construction tech. Contech.
It's Contech, Ollie. It's Contech and PropTech.
I feel we need a new one.
Property tech and construction
ArchiTech,
tech.
but
yeah.
Yeah, no. Obviously, one of the overriding themes here has been education around these topics at a earlier stage or in supplementary to working in practice. And I know Will and Giulia, you both are in the space, so I don't know if you have a upcoming course or something you'd love to plug. If now, put it out there.
Yeah, I'm gonna start a new YouTube channel, which is gonna talk about business development and finance. So if you want to make sure that you know when it comes out, just follow me on Instagram or on LinkedIn. Either way, you will be notified and you'll see some videos out there. So this is me, Giulia.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just about to start a new course called Sustainable AI for Architecture, where it's with a company called Gritnova Global Campus, and it's an online thing based in Dubai, but we have some really good sort of specialists from Grimshaw as well, Perkins and ACOM and things, and we're sort of looking into computational design. And I'll be doing a piece on about monetizing these sorts of things and also about sustainability. So it's on critnova.com. They do a lot of kind of tech-based stuff and now doing more architecture things. It's a
Sounds like we
course.
should tune in.
Cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Giulia, we are also in the process of starting our own YouTube channel here at ArCHI-TECH Network. I'm literally recording a few videos not as we speak, but just before this. So we'll definitely connect on the YouTube front. So yeah, everyone be sure to give Will and Giulia a follow here on Clubhouse and also on the Instagram pages to all the stuff they're doing. Otherwise, Will, Giulia, thank you so much for joining us. I think this has been a really interesting one. As usual, Faisal and Guillaume, thank you for joining as moderators as well. We will be back next week with some topic TBD. But yeah, as usual, we'll be back at the same time next Sunday. Yeah, once again, thank you, Will and Giulia, and we'll see you guys. We'll see you guys next weekend. Everyone, have a good Sunday.
Thank you so much. Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.